Big shields, big axes, and big hearts. Big beards mostly, just mostly the big beards. Welcome back to Bumblebee. You saw the title, you know what's up. Top 10 messed up things that Viking rulers did. Let's do it. Number 10, bears for pets. Okay, right off the bat, let's get crazy. Some of the hardest character deaths in Game of Thrones were definitely the direwolves. Also, spoiler alert, but also you had 8 years, so wolves as pets sounds like something Vikings would do for sure, but more often than not, they would just have dogs and cats just like us. Few of these animals were kept as pets, really. They all had a Viking purpose. They all had the big, cats probably had a big beard too, most likely. Viking cats belonged in the house to chase away rodents, just like they do today. Freya, the goddess of love in Norse mythology, rides in a cart that's being pulled by 2 cats. Cutest little cart ever. These cats were Egyptian. Most of the cats in Scandinavia came from Egypt at that time, and they adapted to a much colder climate. Viking dogs were also a thing. They were often found in graves next to human remains, so the man's best friend thing goes way back. They were hunting dogs and herding dogs, and they too followed their masters to Valhalla, hence why the bones would always be found together after death. Here's the crazy part though, Vikings would also domesticate bears from cubhood. Yeah, they would have Viking bears as pets. What a fun way to kick this list off. Number 9, Norse Paganism. If you're a fan of the MCU, this guy Thor here with the cape and the hammer and the big muscles, odds are you've heard of him before Nick Fury introduced you. Thor and Odin, they come from Norse mythology. The Aesir are the main gods of the pantheon. Those include Thor, Odin, and even Loki. And yes, in Norse mythology, they lived on Asgard. It's not just MCU stuff, one of the 9 realms. So they believed that if they fought hard enough and lived the most fierce warrior lives they could, they would end up in the halls of Valhalla to join Odin in the fires of Ragnarok, the most fierce battle of all. The Vikings didn't have a name for their religion at first, so when they eventually ran into Christianity, they called it the Old Way, which just sounds cool. It's like, ah yes, the old way. It's referred to today as the Asatru, that's the worship of Norse gods. That term became popular in the 19th century, so it came much later. There was a Nordic religion society in Denmark that had around 600 members, and that was back in 1997, so pretty recently, and it was approved officially in 2003. Believers now can mostly be found throughout Denmark, Sweden, Norway, and Iceland. Number 8, horned helmets. Okay, when you think of Vikings, you probably imagine a very large man and a big ass beard with some horns. You got a horn to blow on, a horn to drink wine out of or something, or some ale, and then 2 horns here on your helmet. Just the horniest fella. Well, aside from looking cool, this horned helmet would have served absolutely no purpose to a warrior in combat. I don't know, unless there's a guy out there just headbutting all of his opponents individually, I don't know. The horned helmets were only introduced into Norse culture when costume designer Carl Emil Doppler made them for Norse-themed operas in the 19th century. So it's really just modern art that we're thinking of. Also, Thor surely doesn't help. He has like wings on his helmet. I'm like, is that real or is that just Chris Hemsworth? I can't tell the difference. Number 7, hockey. I had to share this one, you know, being a Canadian and all, this one hurt. We found out that hockey wasn't our thing during Canada's 150th celebration. How epic is that? Oops, timing. I'm cold a lot of the time. My face hurts here in Canada. It hurts when I walk to the store and get my weird bagged milk and then I return back to my igloo. You know how it is. That's the idea, right? That Canadians are cold and they play hockey all the time. Well, honestly, yeah, pretty much. Not too far off. Well, hockey isn't just our favorite winter activity. Vikings loved it too. They actually brought it here in the first place, believe it or not. They didn't call it hockey also. They called it a way better name. They called it slap and fatten, which means to slap the fat around. You slap some fat with a stick. Me and the boys are gonna go around and do some road slap and fatten. Car, heads up, pause the slap and fatten. Let's get out of here. Vikings would get sticks and try and slap some fat in between 2 posts. Imagine getting cross-checked by a Viking. See you later, chest plate. Number 6, what's that smell? You would think that just looking at a Viking that they would probably smell bad. I don't know, they're by the sea a lot, they're always damp, there's lots of hair. I mean, the beards alone probably suck up 1% of the ocean. Barnacles and all that jazz. But believe it or not, these Vikings didn't smell bad. They were actually known for their hygiene. When excavations were done and all these sites that Vikings lived at, well, rather raided and then lived at, ancient hygiene tools were found. So like tweezers, combs, ear cleaners, they were into it. They weren't lucky enough to have Q-tips back then, so instead they used animal bones, which wouldn't hurt too much. Your eyes wouldn't really roll for that one, I don't think. It's just business, no pleasure. Vikings would bathe once a week, which to us sounds like a risky move, but once a week for that time period, that's amazing, that's unheard of. Queen Elizabeth I would only bathe once a month. So put that in comparison. Mind you, when you're hauling gear throughout a forest and then you have to use your axe for 4 hours straight, you might sweat a little bit more than the queen. Number 5, the first raid. The first official Viking raid took place in 793 AD. These Viking raiders left such a huge mark on history that we refer to this time period as an age. Just like the Middle Ages, we have the Viking Age. It officially lasted from 793 to 1066, the year of the last big Viking battle. I said I'll get into that later on. I didn't, I just talked about hockey and slap fatten. Departing from agrarian pagan Scandinavia, settlers and traders rolled up to England and they arrived in Lindisfarne, and then from then on they just invaded hundreds of settlements. Now English kings were ruling over coastal areas at the time, and they needed to start making defense plans from all these seagoing pagans that everybody's now talking about. Imagine hearing about pirate Vikings. I'd be like, what? Who are these? They have what? Beards and axes? Number 4, Viking funerals. Now, I know this isn't messed up per se, but I really wish that we still did Viking funerals. They would be way more fun. I don't know, instead of carrying that 900-pound casket down that aisle for like 14 city blocks, Vikings would do it in one of 2 ways, and both were pretty epic to witness, I'm sure. One way, they would bury the body, the classic, right? They would leave stone circles around the shallow graves that they dug, or do these burial mounds, or grave fields, usually after a battle. Vikings were pagan. They believed that the more smoke there was during a cremation, the better. The smoke was their way of reaching the afterlife. Boats also symbolized safe passageway to the afterlife in Norse mythology, so Vikings would shape these stones around the grave like a ship or a boat. But high-ranking Norsemen, they would be buried with their boats. In 834 AD, the Osberg ship burial honored 2 women, and this ship vessel was massive. It was 70 feet long and 17 feet wide, had 15 oars on each side. It was discovered in Norway on a farm, so the whole shooting an arrow while they're at sea thing, that sadly wasn't common. It wasn't a thing at all, really. Because if you missed, you just gave away the Osberg and you botched the funeral. Way to go. I know, sorry, I know. Number 3, hit the slopes. Vikings didn't invent skiing by any means, but they did make it cooler. The name skiing actually comes from an Old Norse term that means to stride on skis, and Viking would hunt on these skis. They got so good at hunting down elk on these skis that a law had to be written in order to protect them from going extinct. That's how good they got. The Gulathing Law of 1274, it was written in Norway, and it outlaws the hunting of elk while on skis. You probably read that and you're like, who the what? Skiing was such a big advancement for Vikings that there's 2 Norse gods involved in the sport. We have Ullr, the god of snow, and Skadi. Imagine these 2 showing up in the next Thor movie. Game over, man. Take my money. Number 2, rap battles. I'm currently in the middle of Netflix Rhythm and Flow series. It's a great time. I'm loving it. It's like American Idol, but for rap. Like, hi, that's amazing. Rap battles today are nuts. They're crazy, they're intimate. Rap battles today are so impressive, but imagine getting schooled by a Viking. Yeah, you heard me. Imagine a Viking battling you and then just destroying everything that you care about after destroying you with words. You got a twofer. During those olden days, you needed a way to pass time. If you couldn't play hockey or slap fatten, and there weren't any villages to destroy, you always had poetry. Fighting comes from the Old Norse term fleita, which means provocation. Insult exchange, but make it theater. Norse literature really has tales of their gods fighting. Imagine the next season of Loki and he's battling Freya. I'm like, come on, he's got this. It's hometown advantage. It wasn't to see who can diss the other's hometown the hardest, really, per se. This is actually a challenge in order to see who can spontaneously think of a poetic retort. In Anglo-Saxon England, flighting would go down during a great feast, enjoying roast while watching a roast. We love it. This was entertainment in the 15th and 16th century Scotland. Now we have, well, this. We just have me ranting about flighting. If you like it, give it a thumbs up. I'm doing my best. And finally, number 1, go berserk. Whenever you're playing a video game or like Assassin's Creed Valhalla per se, that health bar at the top starts to glow and you're ready. For a brief second, you can go beast mode and then everyone can hit you with arrows and nothing happens, right? You go berserk. Most games have this in some way, but did you know berserkers were a real thing in history? Just like Thor and Loki and everything else, apparently. Those Norse warriors would arrive to the battle decked out in bearskins. The term means to change form, so these guys were considered a higher power when it came to these battles. So you gotta call in the big dogs, or as they were described back then, mad dogs. They could take an opponent down with just one hit, and today we have an idea of what may have helped the fight. The odds that the guys were on something, be it mushrooms, maybe they were hammered, are pretty high. Pun intended. And before we continue on, we're gonna shout out some comments from our last video. This is from Top 10 Crazy Things Soldiers Went Through in the Civil War. Matthew Lane says, I just realized I wasn't subscribed even though I watch your videos all the time. Honestly, thanks for admitting it, but you know what? There's a button for that. I'm not gonna tell you where it is, but if you click it, Problem solved. Thank you for watching. Ricer ACM says, does anyone else think Taylor seemed kinda sad in this video? He just didn't have his normal enthusiasm. I hope everything's okay. Thank you for the video, Taylor. You are always my favorite. This is amazing. Yeah, I'm fine. Thank you for asking. It's just, you know, a video on the Civil War. So didn't want to be as goofy. Half the comments were like, hey, you didn't talk about slavery enough. And the other half were like, he wasn't silly enough. So sometimes you gotta pick a lane. You gamble. Guys, thank you so much for joining us on Bumblebee. I'm Taylor McWaters. Those were the 10 messed up things that Viking rulers did. And we'll see you next time. Peace. Stupid walk off.